A Journey to the Center of the Earth. Chapter 5. Where is the water? The next day, our journey took place at a very early hour. There was no time for even the least delay. According to my figures, it would take at least 5 days to get back to the place where the tunnels divided. I can never describe all the suffering we endured on the way back. My uncle accepted that the suffering in silence, finally convinced that he had made a great error by choosing the eastern tunnel. Hans, that strong man, accepted all that came his way with quiet strength. As for myself, well, I must admit that I did nothing but complain about the terrible situation we were in. As I expected, our supply of water gave out completely on the first day's march. I was so tired that more than once I came close to collapsing on the rocky ground. When this finally did happen, Hans and my uncle stopped and tried to comfort me, but I could see that fatigue and lack of water were torturing my uncle as well. After a time, I moved along without thinking or feeling. I remember nothing of this period of time except that it was like a horrible nightmare. At last, at 10 o'clock in the morning, on Tuesday, the 8th of July, after crawling on our hands and knees for many hours, more dead than alive, we reached the point where the eastern tunnel began. I lay like a dog on the hard, dry lava, unable to rise. Deep groans and sighs passed from my lips. Then I fell into a faint. Soon, I felt my uncle lift me tenderly in his arms. Through the fog that had enveloped my mind, I heard him tearfully say, "Poor boy." I tried to speak, but I could not. I squeezed his trembling hand to show him that I was all right. He reached to the ground and brought up his drinking gourd, then put it to my lips. "Drink, my poor boy, drink," he said. Had I heard right? Was my uncle mad? Yet, before I could ask myself these questions a second time, a mouthful of water cooled my parched lips and throat. "One last mouthful of water, the very last," my uncle said. "I've saved it at the bottom of my bottle for you. 20 times, 100 times I've resisted the temptation to drink it. I knew that when we reached this point, you would need it to go on." "Thank you, my dear uncle," I cried. "Thank you from the bottom of my heart." And big tears rolled down my feverish cheeks. My uncle smiled kindly at me. "Well," I said, "there is little doubt about what we must do now. There is no more water, therefore our journey is at an end. Let us return back to Sneffels." "Go back?" my uncle said, speaking more to himself than anyone else. "Must it be that way?" "Yes," I cried. "Go back, and now. We haven't a moment to lose." "So, my dear Harry," the professor said after a moment's silence, "those few drops of water have not brought back your energy or your courage?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Aren't you discouraged, sir?" I asked. "What?" he bellowed. "Give up? Just when we are on the verge of success? Never! Never shall it be said that Professor Hardwig gave up." "Then we must make up our minds to die," I said quietly. "No," my uncle answered. Go back and take Hans with you. I will go on alone." "You ask us to leave you?" "Leave me, I say. I will complete this journey, or I will never return to the surface of the earth. Now go." I couldn't believe what my uncle was saying. I went to Hans, who sat quietly watching the scene between my uncle and myself. I caught his hand in mine, but he never moved a muscle. I pointed the way up, the way to the summit of Mount Sneffels. The Icelander gently shook his head and pointed to my uncle. "Master," he said quietly. "The master is a madman!" I cried. We must drag him with us. Do you hear me?" Although I tugged furiously at his arm, Hans did not move an inch. Then my uncle spoke, quietly yet firmly enough to get my instant attention. "My good Harry, be calm," he said. "Listen to what I have to say to you." I sat back then, folded my arms, and looked my uncle squarely in the eye. "The lack of water is the sole obstacle to the success of our journey," he said. "In all of our travels we have found no water. However, while you were unconscious, I explored the entrances to the other 3 tunnels, and I found that one goes directly downward into the bowels of the earth. If we follow that one, it will take us directly to the layer of rock that is guaranteed to have springs. We shall have all the water we need in a few hours." I said nothing. "One more day. That is all I ask," he added. "If we find no water within that time, I will give up this journey, and we will all return to the surface." I knew how much this journey meant to my uncle, and how great a chance he was taking by making this offer. So I had to agree to the one day. "Let us go then," I said. "One day, and we will return to the surface where we belong." We now began our second descent, this one into the western shaft. The tunnel we entered and traveled along was a fissure in the earth, probably caused by when the hot earth began to cool at the beginning of its life. For a geologist, this was a paradise of rock specimens never before seen by man. I could have spent days just looking and touching the many rock formations, with threads of copper, manganese, platinum, and gold running through them. It was now 8 o'clock, and we still had not found any water. The sufferings I endured were horrible, but my ears were alert to catch the sound of a spring. I listened and listened, but never did hear a drop. Suddenly, I felt a deadly faint come over me. My legs refused to support me any longer. My eyes could not see. I gave one last despairing cry and began to fall forward. "Help! Help! I'm dying!" I cried. Just before my eyes closed, I saw my uncle standing over me, his face tortured with pain and sorrow. "All is over," he said quietly. When I opened my eyes again, I saw my uncle and Hans lying near me, wrapped in their sleeping rugs. Were they asleep or dead? I could not think of sleeping. All I could think of was the miles and miles of the earth's crust above me, weighing on me like some giant cloak, crushing me in my granite bed. I lay there for hours. The silence was like a tomb. Suddenly, a movement caught my eye. Hans was moving away from our camp with a lamp in his hand. "Hans is leaving us!" I cried. "Hans! Hans! If you are a man, come back!" Then I realized that these words were spoken only to myself. I was immediately ashamed of my suspicions. Hans was going down deeper into the tunnel, not up. He must be searching for the water that would save us. Had he, in the silence of the earth, heard the sound of a spring?